Hi everyone, welcome to Echoes of the Past. Today, we're uncovering a fascinating story from America's old history, full of twists, danger, and hidden truths. Stick around till the end, and if you enjoy it, don't forget to like, share, tell you how to, and subscribe to keep the stories coming. Now, let's begin the story. In the remote mountains of Kentucky, where the old wilderness road carved a treacherous path toward the western frontier, there once stood an inn that travelers spoke of in hushed, reverent tones. Millbrook Inn, they said, offered a kind of warmth that went beyond clean beds and hot meals. 4 sisters ran this mountain haven, and men who arrived as strangers often left feeling as if they had stumbled upon something rare, something worth risking the journey to find again. The Cunningham sisters had a reputation that stretched across 3 states. Merchants would postpone business just to spend another night at Millbrook. Cattlemen willingly detoured through dangerous mountain passes rather than miss the chance to experience the sisters' legendary hospitality. Those who stayed there often spoke of comforts lonely travelers rarely encountered, attention so personal, so intimate, that grown men were said to weep when it came time to leave. But in the winter of 1851, the tone of the stories changed. Travelers began arriving at settlements throughout Kentucky with unsettling tales. They claimed the road to Millbrook Inn was now littered with abandoned wagons and riderless horses. At first, local authorities brushed it off as frontier gossip, but soon a pattern emerged that no one could ignore. Dozens of men had vanished without a trace, and the last place anyone had seen them was on the winding path leading to the welcoming door of the Cunningham. Sisters, before we go any further into what really happened in those isolated Kentucky mountains, I have a small request. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss stories like this. And let me know in the comments, what state are you listening from? I love connecting with people across the country who share my fascination with America's hidden, buried secrets. What authorities we're about to uncover would reveal that the warmth travelers found at Millbrook Inn came at a cost far more terrifying than anyone dared imagine. The year was 1831, when Jeremiah Cunningham succumbed to consumption, leaving behind not only a thriving mountain estate, but also 4 daughters, ranging in age from 16 to 20. Their property lay tucked deep in the highlands, between Virginia's Shenandoah Valley and the Kentucky frontier, 800 fertile acres with livestock, grain fields, and, most importantly, a strategically placed in serving those heading west. On the wilderness road, Margaret, the eldest at 26, had the sharp mind of a born businesswoman, and a cold, calculating nature that would later prove deadly. Catherine, 24, inherited their mother's ethereal beauty and an uncanny ability to make any man feel like the most important person in the world. Sarah, 22, shared her late mother's knowledge of mountain herbs and their many uses, knowledge that, in time, would take on a far more sinister purpose. And Elizabeth, the youngest, at 16, possessed an innocent charm capable of disarming even the most suspicious traveler. The Cunningham estate had been built by their grandfather back in 1798, when the Wilderness Road was little more than a dangerous trail carved through hostile lands. By 1831, it had become one of the most respected stopping points for merchants, settlers, and adventurers heading for Kentucky's bluegrass country. The main house, a sturdy two-story log structure, with stone foundations, stood proudly on a ridge overlooking the valley. The inn itself offered 6 comfortable guest rooms, a large common area with massive stone fireplaces, and a kitchen capable of feeding dozens. But what made the Cunningham place truly special wasn't its location or its amenities. It was the reputation for hospitality, carefully built over decades. Travelers spoke in distant towns of the warmth of the Cunningham welcome, the smooth mountain whiskey, and the comfort of clean beds after weeks of dangerous roads. Jeremiah Cunningham had built something more valuable than gold: trust. The property, ploy a small but loyal staff. Ezra Hawthorne, a weathered mountain man in his 50s, had served as foreman since the inn's earliest days. His knowledge of the mountains was encyclopedic, and his loyalty to the Cunningham family unshakable. 2 German immigrants, the Zimmer brothers, Klaus and Heinrich, had arrived 3 years earlier, looking for work and stability in the New World. They lived in a cabin near the estate's eastern edge, managing the livestock and fields with methodical precision. The autumn of 1831 ushered in what locals would later remember as the inn's golden years. The sisters, working together out of necessity, discovered they had a rare gift. They could make guests feel not only welcome, but cherished. Margaret kept the books balanced and the business profitable. Catherine's charm ensured guests stayed longer than planned. Sarah's skill in mountain cooking and medicinal teas bolstered their reputation for comfort, and Elizabeth's bright, youthful spirit lifted even the weariest traveler's mood. But beneath the polished veneer of mountain hospitality, something darker began to stir. The isolation that had once protected the Cunningham family from the dangers of frontier life now provided something else entirely: privacy. And privacy, in the hands of 4 clever young women with few scruples, could become a dangerous thing indeed. It was on a bitter November evening in 1832 that Thomas Kellerman arrived at Millbrook Inn, and with him came the first shadow of the darkness to come. Kellerman was a cattle buyer from Richmond, traveling alone with a heavy purse of gold coins meant for Kentucky markets. A man of 45, recently widowed, with no children and few close ties, precisely the sort of guest the sisters would later learn to identify with chilling accuracy. The temperature had fallen below freezing, and a light snow dusted the winding path as Kellerman's horse climbed toward the inn. Margaret greeted him at the door with her practiced smile, her sharp eyes taking in the fine cut of his clothes, the weight of his saddlebags, and most importantly, the loneliness etched into his face. A man traveling alone just a year after losing his wife carried more than money. He carried a desperate hunger for human connection. "Welcome to Millbrook Inn," Margaret said, her voice carrying just the right mixture of professionalism and warmth. I really liked how she introduced herself here, calm, confident, yet inviting. "I'm Margaret Cunningham, and these are my sisters. We'll make sure your stay is everything you need it to be." Kellerman's eyes lit up as he took in the warm glow of the common room. I could almost smell Sarah's venison stew just reading this part, and I loved the little touch. Put Catherine arranging fresh wildflowers in the cold season, no less. This place seemed like a dream for a lonely widower, a sanctuary where beautiful, attentive women treated you like family instead of just another paying customer. Over the next 3 days, the sisters gave Kellerman an experience that honestly sounded more like a fantasy than an ordinary stay. Sarah's meals weren't just good, they were restaurant-quality feasts, perfectly seasoned game, fresh bread, and her famous honey cakes. That detail really stood out to me. It made the place feel alive. Margaret engaged him in long, thoughtful conversations about business and politics. I found that interesting because it made Kellerman feel respected, not just entertained. Elizabeth's innocent laughter at his stories made him feel worldly, while Catherine gave him something far more dangerous, the illusion of romance. On his second evening, after the other guests had gone to bed, Catherine found Kellerman sitting alone by the fire, staring into the flames with that hollow look of a man who had lost everything. This part really hit me. It felt almost cinematic. She approached with 2 glasses of Sarah's spiced rum, perfectly warmed in crystal tumblers that caught the flickering firelight. "You seem troubled, Mr. Kellerman," she said, settling gracefully into the chair beside him. "Sometimes sharing a burden makes it lighter." For the next 2 hours, Kellerman poured out his heart. He spoke of his late wife, Mary, their failed attempts to have children, and the painful return each evening to a house that still carried her scent, lavender soap. Catherine listened with flawless sympathy, gently touching his hand now and then, leaning closer at just the right moments. "Loneliness is a terrible thing," she said softly as the fire burned lower, "but it doesn't have to be permanent." What happened next wasn't written anywhere in any official record, but Kellerman's behavior the following morning practically told the whole story. He moved through breakfast like a man who had rediscovered life's sweetness. He even extended his stay by 2 more days, despite how urgent his journey to Kentucky had seemed before. Most telling of all, he started making plans to return to Millbrook on his way back to Richmond. "I've never experienced hospitality like this," he told Margaret as he prepared to leave. "You and your sisters have created something truly special here. I'll be recommending this place to every traveler I meet." Margaret smiled, accepting a generous payment, nearly double the standard rate, pressed into her hands with what seemed like genuine gratitude. "We look forward to your return visit, Mr. Kellerman. Safe travels." But Thomas Kellerman would never make it to Kentucky. 3 days later, his horse was found wandering riderless near Cumberland Gap. Kellerman himself had simply vanished. leaving behind only questions that, surprisingly, would never be investigated. Everyone assumed, logically enough for that dangerous frontier, that he had fallen victim to bandits or wild animals. Only the Cunningham sisters knew the truth. Hinrichs Zimmer had been waiting in the woods a half-mile from the inn when Kellerman departed that morning. I found this part chilling, the cold practicality of it all. The German immigrant, quiet and efficient, was valuable for jobs that needed discretion. Kellerman never even saw the blow, a blacksmith's hammer to the base of the skull. His body was wrapped in canvas, buried deep in the mountain forest. His heavy purse of gold coins, however, found its way back to Millbrook in that night. The four sisters sat around their kitchen table, counting Kellerman's money and planning their future. Margaret had already done the math. The amount they'd just acquired was more than a full year's legitimate profit. Catherine had shown that lonely men could be manipulated with frightening ease. Sarah had proved that evidence could vanish with the right chemistry and mountain craft. And Elizabeth, innocent, sweet Elizabeth, had demonstrated that even the gentlest face could keep monstrous secrets. "He won't be missed for weeks," Margaret said, stacking the gold coins with calm precision. "No family, no clothes. Friends, traveling alone to a place where no one knows him. Perfect." "It was almost too easy," Catherine added, still wearing the same soft, comforting expression she'd used on their victim. "He would have given us anything we asked for." What they discovered that cold November night was something far more valuable than gold. They discovered how to make people disappear. The winter of 1832 gave the sisters time to refine their method and lay down the protocols that would serve them for nearly 2 decades. Marguerite, with her sharp business sense, built a system for selecting perfect targets, men traveling alone, carrying wealth, with few family ties and no fixed schedule that would raise alarm if they vanished. Sarah's role grew beyond cooking. She delved into the study of toxins, pokeweed berries, foxglove, water hemlock, plants that could mimic natural illness, cause heart failure, or kill within hours while leaving little trace. She created a hidden garden behind the main house, a deadly pharmacy disguised as a humble medicine patch. Catherine perfected the art of emotional deception, learning to become whatever a man needed her to be. For the religious, she became devout; for the intellectual, well-read and engaging; for the grieving, a source of gentle comfort. This, I think, is the most unsettling part, her ability to slip into any role. To make a man believe in her so completely was both her greatest skill and her most terrifying gift. And Elizabeth, despite her youth, was essential. Her innocence provided perfect cover. Any guest who grew suspicious couldn't hold on to their doubts around a girl who looked too pure to deceive. She played another role, too, the inn's quiet early warning system. Her easy charm and warm friendliness allowed her to gently pry into travelers' backgrounds, plans, and finances without ever arousing suspicion. The darker side of their work ran with near-mechanical precision, thanks to the Zimmer brothers. Claus, ever resourceful, had uncovered a network of natural caves hidden in the mountainside, accessible only through a cleverly disguised opening behind a tumble of stones. Under the cover of night, bodies were carried there and sealed away behind loose rock, where the mountain's very chemistry hastened decay. Every belonging was handled with care, valuables set aside, anything traceable to the victim either buried elsewhere or destroyed. But perhaps the most important figure in their quiet conspiracy was Ezra Hawthorne, a man whose name carried weight throughout the region. His reputation for honesty was unimpeachable. When whispers arose about travelers who never reached their destinations, Ezra would solemnly confirm that, yes, the missing guest had stayed at Millbrook Inn and had departed in good health and high spirit. His weathered face and calm authority silenced doubt before it could grow. The spring of 1833 brought their second kill, a North Carolina tobacco merchant named William Fraser. He carried nearly $500 in silver, the profits of a successful season. A solitary man of 38, Fraser traveled alone, preferring not to divide earnings with partners. He arrived on a stormy April night, weary from weeks on the road and instantly drawn to the inn's warmth. The sisters executed their strategy like clockwork. Margaret spoke business with him, discovering his route and wealth. Sarah fed him meals so fine he lingered longer than intended. Elizabeth charmed him with music, touching a loneliness he rarely allowed himself to feel. And then there was Catherine, the final snare. On his third night, Fraser sat alone in the common room, a leather-bound book of poetry resting on his lap. Catherine approached, timid on the surface, and asked if he might read to her. She loved the sound of fine words, though she'd never had much schooling. He obliged, reading softly at first, then with growing strength as she listened, rapt, and silent. For 2 hours they sat by lamplight, a scene of innocent intimacy that would turn fatal. When he finished, she laid a gentle hand on his arm, praising the beauty of his voice. The ice around his heart, decades thick, began to crack. "I've never met anyone like you," he confessed, emotion roughening his voice. "You make me feel alive again." "Then don't leave tomorrow," she whispered, her eyes glowing in the lamplight with perfectly crafted sincerity. "Stay another day. Read to me again." Fraser stayed a week. Catherine deepened their closeness, while Sarah quietly introduced trace amounts of pokeweed into his evening tea. The symptoms were subtle, a faint dizziness, mild stomach pain, nothing alarming. Fraser blamed the discomfort on the strain of travel and the confusing weight of new emotions he hadn't felt in years. On his final night, Catherine invited him to a private supper in her room. Sarah prepared his favorite dish and poured wine, laced with a precisely measured dose of water hemlock. Fraser, smiling across the candlelit table at the woman he thought could change his life, never realized death was already working its way through him. The poison performed exactly as Sarah tended to anyone who might have examined him. The sudden cardiac failure looked natural. A middle-aged man, overcome by excitement. Perhaps too much wine, perhaps passion after years of solitude. He was found the next morning in Catherine's bed, appearing to have passed peacefully in the night. They buried him in the inn's family cemetery, a detail Margaret had insisted on. A grave with a carved stone gave the illusion of care and respect, and conveniently hid the truth in plain sight. The cemetery had long held Cunningham ancestors. Another burial raised no eyebrows. Fraser's silver and valuables vanished, put into the sisters' growing fortune, while his wagon and horses were sold off quietly to merchants passing through. Locals believed he'd decided to settle in Kentucky instead of returning home, a believable fate that no one cared to investigate. By the year's end, the sisters had perfected their grim enterprise. They killed sparingly, never more than a handful each year, spacing the deaths carefully to avoid suspicion. Every missing guest had a story prepared: a sudden illness, an accident, a decision to stay out west. And above all, they trusted one another completely. No rumors escaped the walls of Millbrook Inn. But what came next would darken their tale even further. If this story is already chilling your blood, share it with a friend who craves dark mysteries. Tap the like button to keep us digging deeper into history's shadows, and subscribe so you never miss what's next. Because the Cunningham sisters' tale was only beginning. Between 1834 and 1845, Millbrook Inn's reputation soared. Word spread far beyond the mountains. Travelers spoke of it with the same respect reserved for Richmond's finest establishments. Margaret expanded their legitimate operations to adding a stable of strong horses, producing premium whiskey from a small distillery, even offering guided hunts led by Ezra Hawthorne himself. The sisters had built not just an inn, but an empire, one of hospitality, elegance, and death hidden in perfect balance. Their legitimate ventures brought in steady wealth and, just as importantly, gave the sisters a reputation as shrewd entrepreneurs rather than simple innkeepers. The guest register from that era, now carefully preserved in the Virginia State Archives, reads like a testament to their growing success. Names from across the East Coast filled Margaret's elegant ledger: merchants out of Charleston, Richmond politicians, Baltimore land speculators, even adventurous souls from as far away as Boston. Many of them returned again and again, recommending Millbrook to colleagues and friends as a rare haven in the mountains. But behind this polished facade ran a lethal enterprise, a finely tuned machine that operated with quiet precision. The sisters had perfected the art of choosing their victims. Catherine possessed an almost uncanny instinct for identifying men who would vanish without anyone truly noticing: the solitary, the secretive, the rootless travelers whose disappearances could be explained away with ease. Sarah's growing expertise in toxicology now included dozens of plant and mineral-based poisons, each producing different symptoms, each harder to trace than the last. Elizabeth, with her warm and seemingly harmless conversation, could draw out details of a man's finances, family, and future plans without raising a single suspicion. Bile and Margaret ever the strategist, oversaw the whole operation like a general directing a campaign. During those years, they dispatched roughly 43 men, a figure later confirmed by a railroad surveyor who stumbled upon the truth. Every death was calculated, executed according to strict routines designed to keep the sisters safe while extracting maximum profit. Targets were studied for days, sometimes weeks, before a final decision was made. Take, for example, Jonathan Waverley, a Pennsylvania land surveyor who arrived in September of 1838. He was mapping remote areas for the state, a job that kept him alone in treacherous terrain for months at a time. He traveled with expensive surveying instruments, cash for his work, and funds for purchasing land he'd marked as promising investments. Margaret spotted the opportunity immediately. His profession meant his absence could go unnoticed for weeks, even months. If he failed to return, no one would look too closely. A man like him could have died from any number of natural dangers. Most telling of all, Waverley was a reserved, somewhat distant man. No close friends, no family likely to demand an inquiry. The sisters went to work without delay. Sarah prepared hearty meals from wild game. Waverley himself had watched Ezra hunt, deepening the illusion of rugged hospitality. Elizabeth engaged him in long talks about his mapping projects, asking thoughtful questions, making him feel clever and appreciated. Margaret discussed the region's land values, gently feeding him the idea of lucrative opportunities in the surrounding valleys. But Catherine was the one who sealed his fate. She never approached him as a flirtation, but as a kindred spirit, someone who, like him, understood the wild dot. She spoke with quiet authority about mountain plants and animals, knowledge gained not from idle curiosity, but from years of studying poisons. She even joined him on small surveying trips, walking the ridges with an ease that both surprised and delighted him. "I've never met a woman who understands the mountains like you do," Waverley confessed one afternoon as they stood overlooking the valley. "Most people see only wilderness. You see the beauty, the order beneath it." "I've lived here all my life," Catherine replied, stepping closer as the wind carried the scent of pine between them. "The mountains have taught me things books never could about life, about death, about the balance between the two." Waverley, thoroughly enchanted, extended what was meant to be a 2-day stay into 3 full weeks, pretending it was for more thorough surveying. In truth, he no longer wanted to leave Catherine's company by then. Sarah had already begun her careful dosing, mild poisons that mimicked the first signs of mountain fever, a known and feared danger among surveyors. The final blow came from Sarah's own innovation, a tincture derived from destroying angel mushrooms. Slow-acting and fatal, inducing liver failure with symptoms nearly identical to genuine fever. Even a skilled physician would likely have misdiagnosed it. Jonathan Waverley died quietly in the mountains, his passing recorded as yet another tragedy of frontier life. His instruments were quietly sold to a Kentucky merchant, his maps folded, kin to Margaret's growing library of regional intelligence. His body was carried to the caves, sealed away with the others. His name became just another line in local records, marked as a casualty of dangerous work in dangerous country. The genius of the sisters' operation was not merely in how they killed, but in how they maintained an unshakable image of respectability. They attended Sunday services in Millbrook, gave generously to church repairs and community funds, and fostered friendships with local families. Margaret served on the regional merchants' board. Sarah offered medical help to nearby farms in times of illness. Catherine taught Sunday school. Elizabeth organized picnics and gatherings to bring scattered mountain families together. All of it served a purpose. It gave them alibis when questions arose, access to gossip about travelers, and, above all, a reputation that made suspicion unthinkable. At the same time, they expended their legitimate wealth, buying land, renting it for income, quietly increasing their influence. They loaned money to farmers and shopkeepers, earning steady interest and quietly securing the loyalty of an entire community. The sisters even branched out into the river trade, buying stock in several steamboat lines running the Ohio. It wasn't just diversification. It tied their mountain enterprise to the great currents of commerce flowing through the region. By the mid-1940s, the Cunningham women ranked among the most prosperous landowners in Western Virginia. Newspapers occasionally profiled them as a rare example of female grit and vision, transforming a remote inheritance into a bustling business empire. But all of that polite admiration masked something darker. Buried beneath their thriving inn and the glow of their success were the remains of more than 40 travelers who had made the fatal mistake of trusting Millbrook's warmth. Each death fed their fortune, sharpened their techniques, and kept the cycle of murder and profit turning quietly under society's nose. The rugged seclusion that once kept them safe from prying eyes had evolved into something more powerful, the perfect hunting ground. To outsiders, Millbrook was a welcoming retreat. In truth, it was a spider's web, elegant, inviting, and deadly to anything that became trapped. Ironically, the downfall of their enterprise did not begin with a sheriff, a suspicious widow, or even a missing fortune. It began with one of their own, Heinrich Zimmer, the younger of the 2 German brothers who handled the dirtiest parts of the sisters' work. Had never been as cold-blooded as his elder brother, Klaus. After a hunting mishap in the autumn of 1849 left him in constant pain, Heinrich turned to laudanum for relief. At first it dulled the agony. Over time it became a refuge from the guilt that gnawed at his conscience. But the drug carried its own curse, paranoia, wild mood swings, and talk that no longer stayed quiet. The breaking point came on a bitter February morning in 1850. Heinrich stumbled to the kitchen door, his eyes glassy with panic and exhaustion, his clothes disordered from a sleepless night. Sarah, alone at the stove, preparing breakfast for a merchant from North Carolina, their next intended victim, met him there. "I can't keep doing this," Heinrich whispered, his voice raw with fear. "I see their faces every time I close. My eyes, all of them, staring at me. 43 men, Sarah. 43 souls begging for justice. Sarah kept her tone calm, but behind her steady expression, her mind was racing. He knew everything, every grave, every method, every detail that could see the sisters swinging from the gallows. "You're sick, Hinrich," she said softly, stepping closer as though to comfort him. "The laudanum's clouding your thoughts. None of what you're seeing is real." But Hinrich shook his head, his voice rising dangerously. "No, I know exactly what we've done, what you made me do, and it has to end." For nearly an hour he swung between sobbing confessions and furious accusations, while Sarah worked to soothe him without waking the merchant upstairs. At last, she persuaded him to return to his cabin, promising they would talk again once he had rested. But Sarah knew there would be no such conversation. Hinrich Simmer had become a threat, and threats could not be left alive. That evening, after the guest had retired, Sarah prepared a lavish supper for the Zimmer brothers, a gesture of gratitude, she claimed, for their years of loyalty. Heinrich's favorite dishes were served alongside her spiced wine, laced with enough foxglove extract to stop a heart before dawn. Heinrich never woke again, his death attributed to the same sudden heart failure that had carried off more than one of Millbrook's unlucky guests. Klaus, who drank less of the wine, survived but suffered permanent heart damage, leaving him weak and dependent on Sarah's constant care. But the quiet solution created fresh unease. Klaus, grieving and weakened, began asking questions. He could not ignore how eerily his brother's final hours resembled those of the travelers they had buried. Loyalty, long unquestioned, began to tremble under the weight of suspicion. Margaret saw the danger immediately. The foundation of trust that had protected them for almost 20 years was beginning to split. One serious inquiry could expose evidence their influence could no longer bury. Quietly, she started preparing for the possibility they might have to abandon Millbrook altogether. The last man to die there was Samuel Hartwell, a Savannah cotton broker carrying more than $1,000 in gold and notes. In March of 1851 he checked in, charming, well-off, and alone, perfect prey. As always, he enjoyed fine food, tender company, and then, without warning, a sudden heart failure that ended his journey north. But this time, the sisters had slipped. Hartwell had arranged a firm meeting date in Pittsburgh, and when he failed to arrive, his business partner raised the alarm. The inquiries spread quickly, eventually landing in the lap of Sheriff Thomas Brennan of Millbrook County, a seasoned, steady lawman, unaccustomed to the scale of what he was about to uncover. At first, Brennan's investigation was routine. Confirm Hartwell's stay, his healthy departure, the inn's impeccable records. Margaret and Ezra played their parts smoothly, as they had so many times before. But Brennan was not like the others. He pressed harder, catching inconsistencies too small for most to notice. And for the first time in 2 decades, the sisters felt the noose begin to tighten. A blacksmith in the next county remembered putting new shoes on a horse that matched the description of Hartwell's. But several days after, Hartwell was supposed to have passed through the area. A merchant recalled selling supplies to someone who looked like him, though the timing didn't match the official date of his departure from Millbrook in these small details might have been explained away by chance or error, but they were enough to make Sheriff Brennan uneasy. He started looking more closely at other missing travelers who had last been seen near Millbrook, and what he found deeply troubled him. County records revealed that, over the past 20 years, at least 15 people had disappeared after staying at the Cunningham property. At first, each case could have been blamed on the dangers of frontier travel, bandits, wild animals, accidents, but together, the pattern was impossible to ignore. Brennan worked quietly, careful not to tip off the sisters. He asked questions discreetly and avoided anyone directly tied to the inn. His big break came when he spoke to Klaus Zimmer during one of the German immigrants' rare trips into town. Klaus, still grieving his brother's death and increasingly uneasy about how it had happened, talked more than usual. "My brother, Hinrich, he was troubled before he died," Klaus told Brennan casually outside the general store. "He spoke of things that kept him awake at night. The mountains hold many secrets, Sheriff, and not all of them should stay buried." But a lesser investigator might have dismissed the cryptic remark, but Brennan recognized it for what it was: a man wrestling with dangerous knowledge. He arranged to meet Klaus privately, far away from Millbrook in there. The truth began to surface. Klaus's confession was hesitant and incomplete. Years of fear and loyalty battled with guilt and suspicion as he spoke in fragments. He didn't directly accuse the sisters of murder, but he described strange late-night activities, hidden burials, and his brother's growing distress enough for Brennan to request search warrants. The raid on Millbrook Inn took place at dawn. On April 15, 1851, 8 armed deputies surrounded the property to prevent anyone from escaping. Brennan had also coordinated with federal marshals, knowing the crimes could cross state lines. The sisters greeted law enforcement with practiced calm. Margaret met Brennan at the door, polite and concerned, offering to help in any way she could. Catherine appeared truly shaken by the suggestion that anything improper had occurred at their respected inn. Sarah offered to prepare refreshments for the officers. Elizabeth seemed frightened and confused by the accusations, but even their calm performances couldn't hide what 20 years of murder had left behind. Inside the main house, investigators found items belonging to missing travelers. A silver pocket watch engraved with Samuel Hartwell's initials, a leather portfolio with Thomas Kellerman's business papers, and bundles of personal letters and photographs from dozens of victims. Sarah's carefully tended garden revealed rows of poisonous plants, some with no use in medicine. In her room were books on botany and chemistry, far beyond what a housewife would need, along with detailed notes on the effects and doses of plant toxins, notes that matched the deaths of specific guests. The final proof came when Klaus, now facing charges as an accessory, led authorities to a hidden cave behind a rock. There lay the skeletal remains of 43 men, along with valuables worth thousands of dollars. Each set of bones told a story of violent death, puncture wounds at the base of the skull, signs of strangulation or suffocation, and chemical traces of heavy metal poisoning dot the trial of the Cunningham sisters became one of the most sensational legal cases in Virginia's history. Newspapers across the country covered the story of 4 women who had built one of the most successful murder for-profit operations in America. The prosecution, led by Commonwealth Attorney Daniel Hutchinson, presented overwhelming evidence of a conspiracy that spanned 2 decades and claimed more than 40 lives. Margaret insisted she was innocent, claiming enemies had planted the evidence. Catherine broke down on the stand, swinging between denial and tearful confessions that implicated all 4 sisters. Sarah refused to speak at all, her silence taken by many as an admission of guilt. Elizabeth, the youngest, pleaded that she had been forced by her older sisters and begged for mercy. The defense tried to paint them as 4 orphaned women struggling to survive on a dangerous frontier. Their lawyer, Marcus Fairfield, argued that desperate times had driven them to desperate acts, and that their youth and gender should be weighed in their sentencing. What unfolded in the shadowed valleys of Western Virginia still sends a chill through history. The crimes were so vast, so coldly orchestrated, that any sympathy for those involved was quickly swallowed by horror. The jury needed less than 3 hours to decide the fate of the Cunningham sisters. The verdict: guilty of multiple first-degree murders. The sentence came swiftly. Margaret, Catherine, and Sarah were condemned to hang on October 12, 1851. Elizabeth, the youngest, whose role was murkier, was spared the rope but sentenced to spend the rest of her life behind prison walls. On a bleak October morning, hundreds gathered to watch the final chapter of a nightmare. Margaret climbed the scaffold with the same icy calm she had shown throughout her trial, offering no last words. Catherine and Sarah, hand in hand, met death together, a quiet act of unity that stood in chilling contrast to the cruelty they had shown so many strangers. Elizabeth was moved to the Virginia State Penitentiary, where she would live out 37 lonely years, insisting until her dying breath in 1888 that she had been manipulated by her sisters. She never received visitors. She never wrote her side of the story. Others who played roles in the case scattered like ghosts. Plough Simmer, who had testified in exchange for immunity, vanished without a trace. Whispers placed him in Ohio, others in Missouri, but he was never seen again. His brother's death and the weight of what he'd exposed seemed to break him entirely. Ezra Hawthorne, accused as an accessory, was given a reduced sentence because of his age and cooperation. He died in prison in 1854, still claiming ignorance of the sisters' murderous scheme. Millbrook in itself, once a beacon of hospitality, could not survive its dark reputation. Sold at auction, it briefly reopened under new owners, but travelers avoided it like the plague. Eventually, it was sold to a mining company, torn down, and the land industrialized. The copper mine, where the bodies of 43 victims were found, was sealed by court order. A simple stone marker still stands. Here lie unknown travelers. 1832 to 1851. May they find in death the peace denied to them in life. But the story didn't just end there. Lawmakers were shaken. New regulations were passed across Virginia and neighboring states. Stricter guest registries, mandatory death reporting, and routine inspections for roadside inns. They became known as the Cunningham Laws, and they changed hospitality forever. Modern criminologists still study the case with a mix of awe and dread. Margaret, they believe, was the mastermind, a cold strategist with the charisma to lure victims and the precision to hide the evidence. Catherine, volatile and emotional, formed dangerous attachments that served the scheme. Sarah, skilled in poisons, displayed a disturbing fascination with death itself. And Elizabeth remains a question mark. Was she truly coerced, or was her innocence a story she told herself for decades? What makes this story so terrifying is how close it came to remaining undiscovered. Had Heinrich Zimmer not broken under the weight of guilt, had Sheriff Brennan not pursued every inconsistency, the sisters might have continued their killing for years, perhaps decades more. It's a reminder of how many stories from history may have simply disappeared into the ground, along with their victims. Even now, local legends twist the facts. Some claim the sisters were victims themselves, driven to desperate acts by isolation, fear, and poverty. Others tell it as a ghost story, for witches luring men to their doom. By the reality, drawn from court records and archived testimony, is more chilling than any campfire tale. Evil hidden in plain sight, wearing the face of kindness. To this day, hikers sometimes claim to find old buttons, scraps of cloth, rusted bits of metal near the site, relics, maybe, of those who never made it home. Ground-penetrating surveys in the 1980s hinted at other possible burial sites, but they were never excavated, which means one thing: we still don't know how many lives the Cunningham sisters truly took. The files in the Virginia State Archives remain a treasure trove for researchers. Ledgers in Margaret's handwriting, Sarah's meticulous notes, binds and poisons, the physical evidence from a quiet inn that turned into a slaughterhouse. Together they paint a rare, complete picture of a 19th-century killing enterprise. One so carefully hidden it nearly got away with everything. And maybe that's the most frightening part. Monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they smile. Sometimes they offer a warm meal and a safe bed. And sometimes those small acts of kindness are the bait for a trap no one ever escapes. So what do you think? Was the full truth be uncovered? Or are there still secrets buried deep in those Virginia mountains, waiting to be found? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your theories. If you're drawn to the dark corners of history, hit subscribe, tap that notification bell, and share this story with someone who loves a good mystery. The past holds countless shadows, and together we'll keep pulling them into the light. See you in the next video.